Awesome. Good morning. Thank you so much for showing up. This is very bright and early. You folks must really care a lot about migration. This is the first time we are streaming a lot of content. The content is going to go up on YouTube. So to the millions and millions who are going to watch me on YouTube, hello. And hello to the room and everybody who showed up this early. Thank you so much. My name is Abhishek Hemrajani. I lead the program management team for Azure Migration. My team is part of Azure Compute. Later in this session, I'm going to be joined by Bharat Sivaraman from my team, who's a senior program manager on my team. Bharat looks at all scenarios related to server migrations to the cloud. He's also our go-to guy for all things API, and also PMs the replication technologies that our products use. So Bharat's going to be on stage giving us a few demos. So we are here to talk about migration and all the tools that can help you accelerate your migration to the cloud. During this session, you'll see us do a new thing. We'll talk about the Microsoft tools, but we'll also talk about tools that our partners are building to, in so many ways, fast-track your migration into the cloud, and we'll give you demos of those tools as well. And if you stick around till the end, I promise to have an announcement that you've not seen at Ignite all week, and I'm pretty sure you'll like that particular piece of information. So with that, let's get started, and let's start talking about what's really driving all of this migration to the cloud. There are a few different triggers that customers are seeing, which is making them consider cloud more and more every single month, every single week. A few things to think about. As your data centers come up for lease expiration, it's the right time to start thinking about, are you ready to go to the cloud? Even things like software and hardware refresh is forcing customers to think about, do they want to go renew those expensive agreements, or they're going to go just to the cloud and start saving money and optimizing on their spend? Even some other considerations like you've bought a new entity and you want to quickly integrate that into your operations. IT should never slow down business. We need to be the cost center that business can depend on to deliver value and deliver value to our shareholders and customers. And cloud can really help you accelerate M&A. Also, growing into a new area, if you want to expand into a new business or scale up, don't need to wait on capacity, don't need to wait upon IT to enable that momentum. You want to be looking at cloud to accelerate all of that innovation. Customers are also realizing that Microsoft Azure, the cloud you can trust, can enable better security and compliance for you than in a lot of cases that you may be able to do on-premises. And that's one another great reason why customers are looking at the cloud. And to be very, very honest, as a past developer, a lot of this is motivated by the desire to innovate on your applications. Move to cloud-native computing, move to cloud-native development technologies, which really is driving all of that momentum to the cloud. And Azure is making it super easy for you to migrate to the cloud. Azure innovates every month, every week. In fact, there's a joke within Microsoft that even we engineers are not able to keep up with everything that's happening in Azure. And it's for the good, because now you have so many more options about thinking about things when you think about the cloud. A few that I want to call out from this slide. Our new services like Azure Migrate help you perform discovery and assessment of your on-premises infrastructure for free. So you can assess VMware data centers or Hyper-V data centers and start planning the migration into the cloud. Even services like Database Migration Service can help you migrate on-premises SQL, Oracle, MySQL, Postgres, or to newer, more secure, more robust platforms like Azure SQL Managed Instance or SQL Azure. In many ways, the time to migrate to Azure is today, and customers are really starting to see all of that benefit when they start moving the workloads to the cloud. Now, these are just a few of the many thousands of customers that are already running in Azure, and they have had great success stories in their migration journeys. The other thing to keep in consideration is migration is very unique to what your end goal is. A lot of customers follow the set pattern, but customers try out a variety of different things. I've had the privilege of working very closely with some of the customers on this slide, and I want to call out a few. Allscripts, for example, used our service Azure Site Recovery to migrate a lot of virtual machines to the cloud. In fact, they used it as a way to integrate newly acquired entities. Also, customers like Chevron are thinking about migration and modernization as they think about the cloud. So they have a set of applications that will modernize, but they have a set of applications that will migrate. And then there are customers that are using the database migration service to move their on-prem databases to the cloud. So there's various paths for customers, but in a sense, the migration journey is made up of 4 discrete steps. You start off by performing an assessment. This is the phase where you really are going to start thinking about what are you running on premises? Is it ready to go to the cloud? What is it going to cost for you to run it in the cloud? And what tools should you be using as you think about migrating that workload into the cloud? When it comes to the actual migration phase, customers usually use a few different options. You could potentially do a lift and shift or a rehost. That's the most common approach. In fact, I'm going to just come out and say it. Rehost is the most optimal strategy you should use when you migrate to the cloud. Of course, you can refactor with containers. You could re-architect with PaaS. Or you could rebuild with cloud-native computing and technologies. But rehost can let you land in cloud soon, and then you can expand as you go along. So for this session, I'm going to focus on rehost. If you want to hear about what we're doing with containers and PaaS, come to the migration booth, and I'm happy to have that conversation with you. Once you land in the cloud, you need to keep your workloads secure. You need to keep them well managed. And you want to keep optimizing them so that you can truly extract value from the cloud down to the last penny. And that's what our services in that secure, well-managed, and optimized buckets let you do. So let's look at a few key services that you can use in each of these areas. And this session is going to cover a lot of them as well. So when it comes to assess, Azure Migrate. Quick show of hands. How many of you have heard about Azure Migrate before this week? Or this week? OK. So Azure Migrate can help you perform discovery assessment of VMware. At Ignite this week, we're announcing support in limited preview for Hyper-V discovery and assessment as well. You can also use services like Data Migration Assistant or SQL Server Migration Assistant for planning SQL Server migration to Azure. When it comes to the actual migration phase, Azure Site Recovery. How many of you have heard about Azure Site Recovery before? Good. I'm happy to see that. Azure Site Recovery started off as a DR product. Now lets you also migrate VMware Hyper-V to the cloud. Also, database migration service can let you migrate on-prem databases to Azure. In fact, our scenario to take SQL Server to SQL Managed Instance went generally available yesterday at Ignite. So these services can help you. Also, Databox, moving large volumes of data, media, archival data to the cloud, you can ship it with Databox. When it comes to optimization, Azure Cost Management can really make sure that you're spending on resources that you need to, and you don't pay for things that you don't want. Similarly, our services like Azure Backup, Azure VM Insights, Log Analytics, Monitoring can make sure that your workload is production ready the minute it lands in the cloud. Now, these are just services from Microsoft. Our partners are enabling a lot of services which can also help you migrate to the cloud. Few that I want to call out. Cloudamize can help you perform assessments for the cloud. Turbonomic, TSO Logic, Movere as well. In terms of actual migration, Zerto, our friends here in the first row, they can help you migrate to the cloud very, very easily. Also, Cloud Endure is an option that you can look at for migration into the cloud. For moving to containers, AppOrbit is a great partner that has some cool tech that they're showing at Ignite this week that can help you take on-premises traditional apps into container-based deployments in the cloud. The point really to be made here is this. How you get to the cloud doesn't really matter. What matters is how soon you get to it and you start benefiting from the Azure platform. So with that, I'm going to first start off by talking about 3 Microsoft services. Azure Migrate for discovery and assessment. I'm going to talk about Azure Site Recovery for migration. And I'm going to talk about database migration service for data migration. And then once we've done that, we will start seeing all of these in demo, and Bharat's going to be on stage to show us that. So Azure Migrate, what does it let you do today? You can discover your on-premises virtual machines and applications and make sure they're ready to go to the cloud. You get insightful workload assessments with Azure Migrate, which really includes things like suitability analysis. Is my workload ready to go to the cloud? Is it running an operating system that is endorsed by Azure? What is it going to cost me to run this workload in Azure? What is the right tool that I should be using to migrate this workload to the Azure? Do I have any risk as I migrate to the cloud? All of those insights you get with Azure Migrate. The best part, you get it for free. So you don't pay for any usage when it comes to Azure Migrate. We also have native capabilities to perform application dependency analysis using Service Map. That's built into the product, and that's available for free as well. Conceptually, if you were trying out Azure Migrate today, this is how you would go about. If you're running VMware on premises, you've made bad choices, but we can help you move to the cloud. Thank you. So we can help you move to the cloud. To do so, you start off by downloading the Azure Migrate Collector appliance. It's available in an OVA format. vCenter admins are very familiar on how you take an OVA format image and convert it into a virtual machine. Once that virtual machine boots up, what you end up with is an Azure Migrate appliance that's running in your on-premises, either VMware or Hyper-V. Once that's up and running, metadata, this is configuration data or performance data for your applications, starts flowing into Azure Migrate, where it can then get processed in Azure, and you are now ready to start pulling insightful assessments using that metadata. And these assessments include things like readiness, suitability, cost, tools, and any kind of risk that may be associated with the migration activity. I recommend the tools, the links at the bottom of that slide. We have a few cool videos that can actually show you this in action, or stick around and we'll show you the demo as well. Now, Azure Migrate went GA earlier this year in spring, but we've been innovating every single month. A few features that I want to call out if you haven't heard already. We now let you do pricing with Azure reserved instances. So if you're planning to use 1-year or 3-year Azure reserved instances, you can use Azure Migrate to do that cost planning. We've also, very secretly last week, switched our ability to do performance analysis on VMware. If you've used Azure Migrate before, you would know that we required you to use a vCenter statistic level 3. We found that with a lot of customers, for example, at Chevron, that customers don't really like doing that, and vCenter tells you not to do it either. So what we've done is we've built our own capabilities to do performance tracking on the on-premises without making you switch the statistics level. That feature is now available in the Azure Migrate experience. We've also announced support very recently by Microsoft for running Windows Server 2008 32-bit in Azure. How many of you knew about that? You can run 2008 32-bit in Azure. OK, all of you need to know that. Windows Server on-prem 2008 can now go to Azure. Not only is it going to be supported, but Microsoft will provide you 3 years of additional security updates even after the planned end of support date. So the planned end of support date is somewhere in 2020. You get 3 years of additional support for free from Microsoft if you move your Windows Server 2008 to Azure. And Azure Migrate has already applied that logic in its assessments to tell you that Windows Server can go to the cloud if you're running it on-prem. Now, when it actually comes to the migration process, here's the Microsoft tool that can help you do that. The tool's called Azure Site Recovery. And what Azure Site Recovery lets you do is, in many ways, effortlessly migrate your VMs and applications to the cloud. We provide 0 application data loss during migration and near 0 downtime during the actual migration activity. You get a broad coverage for hypervisors, VMware, Hyper-V. You can also migrate out of physical servers to Azure. The most important feature to keep in consideration is no impact migration testing when you use Azure Site Recovery. So we'd like you to know that you can run in Azure, and we are very sure that you're going to have a good experience, but we want you to test. So with the no impact migration testing, you can test the performance of your application in Azure. Be sure that it is running right before you decide to migrate it to the cloud. During the time that you're performing any testing, your production application stays OK. It does not get impacted. Its replication also does not get impacted. So you keep getting the latest data in Azure. The testing is completely isolated. It's also a great way to create new dev test environments in Azure. The best part, free for usage during migration, both Azure Migrate and Azure Site Recovery. Let's look at how Azure Site Recovery works conceptually. If you're running Hyper-V on-prem, the process is very simple. You simply install the Microsoft Azure Recovery Services agent on your Hyper-V host or your clusters. You can then start replicating your Windows or Linux virtual machines to the cloud. Perform one-click testing using the Azure Site Recovery plan, or with a click, move over your Windows or Linux workloads to the cloud. Very straightforward. If you're running VMware, the process is similar but not identical. You start off by installing the Azure Site Recovery OVA-based appliance in your vCenter environment, just like Azure Migrate, available in an OVA format. Import it in. The Azure Site Recovery components, config server and process server, get automatically installed. Think of these as the orchestration and data paths for your entire migration activity. Once these are in place, the Azure Site Recovery Mobility Service can get placed automatically on any Windows or Linux virtual machine that you want to migrate. Point to note, Azure Site Recovery uses an in-guest replication technology. Once you have that in place, you can start replicating Windows or a broad range of Linux virtual machines to the cloud, perform no-impact migration testing, happy with the performance, move the workload over to the cloud. Now, just like Azure Migrate, features for Azure Site Recovery keep getting added every month as well. Few that I want to call out. You can now migrate Windows Server 2008 32-bit to Azure with Azure Site Recovery. That feature is already generally available. You can also migrate out of newer platforms or newer operating systems. So we've expanded coverage to Red Hat 7.5, SUSE 12, SP1, SP2, SP3, also letting you migrate out of VMware 6.7. So the coverage keeps getting added all the time. One other important thing to keep into consideration is things like Azure Hybrid Benefit, which can really help you reduce the cost of running Windows in Azure. It's pretty much Windows at the cost of Linux if you are covered under software assurance. Azure Site Recovery can help you apply Hybrid Benefit as well. Now, the final Microsoft tool that I want to quickly talk about before we get into demos is Database Migration Service. So Database Migration Service can help you go from a variety of on-prem sources to the cloud, SQL, Oracle, MySQL, Postgres. You can move to SQL Azure for these databases or move to SQL Server Managed Instance in Azure, which is a great technology that you should look into. You get pretty much the same features like Azure Site Recovery, end-to-end solution, near zero downtime, and you can scale for multiple sources that you may be running on-prem as you migrate them to Azure. I'm going to quickly throw up an announcement slide, things that have been announced this week at Ignite. So moving SQL Server to SQL Server Managed Instance is now generally available. If you haven't tried this, you need to. This is a very, very powerful piece of tech. We are also showing it at our booth, so do stop by if you want to hear more about it. We are also announcing new previews to take MySQL and Postgres to Azure Database, and then also MongoDB to Cosmos DB migration with the Database Migration Service. We are also running a limited preview for Oracle migration to Azure with the service. So with that, we are ready to start talking about the demos. So I'm going to have Bharat come on the stage and set up while I quickly tell you what we're going to do with the demos. So for the rest of this session, we will only talk in context of scenarios. Now, these are scenarios curated based on my experience and Bharat's experience working with customers like you over the last couple of years about specific scenarios that they want to carry out, and they want to know which tool can help them carry out the scenario. One other change you'll see is that we only care about you coming to Azure. What tool you get to use to get there doesn't really matter to us. So if you want to use Zerto to migrate to the cloud, it does not hurt our feelings. We build Azure Site Recovery, but it's great if you want to use Zerto. Similarly, if you want to use Cloudomize for assessment because you're comfortable with Cloudomize, go ahead and do that. We will show you all of these tools for the rest of the session so you know how they work and what features do they have available for your migration activity. So let's start off by talking about the first scenario, and we'll zoom into it. And it's the Discover VMware and Hyper-V virtual machine scenario. And we are going to talk about in the context of Azure Migrate. Before we show you the demo, let's quickly recap the 4 important considerations about Azure Migrate. Agentless discovery, use the OVA appliance, connect to your on-prem. You can start bringing in insights right away. Once you've done that, perform TCO calculation, comes for free with the Azure Migrate product. What is it going to cost you to run the compute? What is it going to cost you to run the storage? Once you've done that, you also benefit from right size and suitability analysis. So if you're over-provisioned on-prem, which is likely going to be the case, we will tell you that you don't need to be. Or in some cases, you may be under-provisioned. We'll also tell you what VM family to go to and what type of storage to go to. And then finally, benefit from the wide variety of Azure platform features that are available for support in Azure Migrate. Things like Azure Reserved Instances or planning migrations to Azure Government, Germany, and China. With that, Bharat, take it away.
All right. Awesome. So what I have set up here in my on-premises VMware environment is I have my Contoso retail app that is servicing my retail function. And what I'm trying to do is to try and get this application migrated over into Azure. Part of the reason why I'm doing this is that this retail application is built on Windows Server 2008 platform, specifically on the Windows Server 2008 32-bit platform. Now, that's a platform that's been very robust and has serviced me very well through the years. But as I begin on my journey to modernize and begin the digital transformation journey, I don't want to have to go through modernizing the operating system first and then rebuild and refactor as I get into Azure. So it's a good opportunity for me to take advantage of the offer available in Azure to be able to take this 32-bit operating system platform and run it in Azure, and also benefit from the Azure hybrid benefit as I move over and get lower licensing costs. So To get started with Azure Migrate, the first thing I'm going to do is to head over to the Azure portal and begin by creating a Azure Migrate project. So I'm just going to say create new resource, say Azure Migrate. And what that's going to do is it's going to find me this Azure Migration project resource. And I begin by creating my project. Now, as we spoke earlier, the Azure Migrate project is a repository for me to discover my VMware inventory and hold the performance and other configuration data that is used to assess the application and make recommendations on the migration strategy to choose as I migrate it over into Azure. So as I create a project, I give my project a name, I pick my subscription, I pick my location, and get started by creating one. Now, I already created that project, so I'm going to log into the project that I pre-created. As I get into the project, the first thing I want to do is discover and assess the inventory that supports my application. So I'm going to head over to this discover and assess setting and say discover machines. As I say discover machines, you will notice that the guide walks me through how I can download the Azure Migrate appliance and get that deployed or set up in my on-premises environment. Abhishek also previously spoke about this new improvement that we made to not rely on the L3 performance statistics and instead use a continuous profiling approach to be able to collect performance statistics. And I'm able to do that by downloading the OBA file from here and using the project credentials to connect that appliance once it's set up back to my project. Now, I've already set up that appliance in my environment. So you see here that it says this Contoso Azure Migrate appliance. And I have also configured it beforehand to be able to talk to the project. As part of the appliance setup, what I've done is I've connected to my vCenter environment so it can discover the inventory of VMware virtual machines. And I've also connected it back to the project using the project key that will allow the appliance to send over information such as performance data and configuration data into the project. Once the discovery is complete, I can head back over to my project. And if I go to the overview page, I will notice here that the machine count has gone up. So I've actually discovered about 11 machines. Now, those of you who paid attention will remember that my vSphere client was showing a lot more than 11 machines. So why did only 11 machines show up here? That's because I'm able to perform a scope discovery to limit my discovery to only collect information relevant to me for the migration project. So I've been able to scope it down based on my resource pool to only collect information relevant to the Contoso retail project in this particular case. So I see only about 11 machines, which I believe are the ones that support my application. Once I have that here, I can get started by creating an assessment. So I'm going to head over here and say create assessment. I'm going to give my assessment a name. So typically, you want to do this by the application. So I'll call it Contoso Retail App. Just give it a number. Pick the virtual machines that are part of my application. This is a typical 3-tier application with a data tier, an application tier, and a web front end. And go ahead and say create assessment. So what Azure Migrate is going to do in the background is going to kick off the process of creating an assessment. Really quick, about 30 to 40 seconds, you should have an assessment ready. Now, I already have a few assessments that I've created beforehand. So I want to head over to one of these assessments that and look at the assessments that I have on this group. So notice here I have this assessment, and when I open the assessment, the first thing I want to look at is the Azure readiness. In the Azure readiness section, you will notice some recommendations from Azure Migrate in terms of what is the best strategy for you to choose as you migrate this application over into Azure, and recommendations in terms of recommended Azure VM sizes, recommended storage tiers, etc. Now, what I've done, or what my application admins have traditionally done over the years, is they've hoarded onto infrastructure on-prem. And that is because it's incredibly tough for them to get extra capacity on-prem as they need it. But I know as I move over into Azure, capacity is not a constraint for me, and I can scale up and get capacity as and when I need it. And I really want to be sure that I'm right-sizing this infrastructure as I move them over into Azure. And that's really where Azure Migrate helps by looking at performance and telling you exactly what you need to run in Azure. And based on that assessment, Azure Migrate is able to tell me that these VMs need to be a certain size. So you see a lot of these recommendations are telling me that I need to think about the standard D2 or the standard D4 size as I take these virtual machines over into Azure. You'll also notice some other information relevant to the virtual machines, such as the operating system that they're running, and what Azure Migrate believes is the readiness level of this VM to move over into Azure. So if you notice, I have about 6 virtual machines where Azure Migrate is telling me these virtual machines are ready to be moved over into Azure. But I also have a couple of virtual machines where Azure Migrate is telling me that these machines are ready, but they're conditionally ready, which means that you need to do a few things before you can migrate them over into Azure. Now, the reason that is, if you notice, is these virtual machines in my environment are indicated as running CentOS either 4, 5, 6, or 7. So I'm not really certain which version of CentOS I'm running, and that's because this information is not available accurately through the vCenter. Now, Azure has worked with a lot of distribution vendors to have a to build a comprehensive list of endorsed distributions in Azure. And what Azure Migrate is telling me here is that as I consider moving these virtual machines over into Azure, I want to make sure that these are running an endorsed version so that I get good support from my distribution vendor. And if not, I can remediate that by applying the necessary updates before I consider moving them over. Now, the other thing that the Azure Migrate is also telling me is the cost breakup of what it's going to take for me to run this application in Azure post a migration, right? So if I head over to the cost detail section, I can see a breakup of monthly costs for compute and storage. And further, within storage, I can look at a breakup of costs based on the storage tier that Azure Migrate is recommending that I migrate to. You'll notice here I also have a breakup on a per virtual machine basis of the cost of running a particular VM SKU in Azure based on the recommendations that Azure Migrate has. Now, the one other detail that I want to get into real quick is the cool dependency view feature that Abhishek spoke about. And what can often happen is over a period of time, we've really lost track of the various components that are part of an application. Now, in my Contoso retail application, I have a fairly good idea of the VMs that comprise that application. But still, I want to be sure that I'm not leaving any essential piece behind, or at least make sure that I'm planning for all the essential pieces. And that is where the dependency view really helps. What a dependency view can show me is it can tell me the virtual machines and which other service or services a particular virtual machine is interacting with. Now, to be able to do that, I need to have a dependency agent installed on my machines. I already have them installed on a collection of virtual machines. So once I have that, I can head over into an individual virtual machine and look at which other virtual machines they're talking to. But even better, I can actually head over to the application group that I've created in Azure Migrate and look at dependencies at a group level. So I can hit the View Dependencies button. I've already loaded it up for you because it takes a few seconds. And you will notice that it can show me the layout of the servers that comprise my application, which servers are talking to which other server, if there are servers that I left behind. And you'll notice that it shows me that my web servers are talking to my application tier, talking to the database backend that's configured in SQL Always On. And when I look at this, I have a good idea that I've not really left any pieces behind. But if I were leaving anything behind, this would tell me, and I'd be able to then use that to plan my migration appropriately. And with that, so that was Azure Migrate for you. A quick summary of my readiness analysis, what it's going to take for me to run this application in Azure, and also showing me the migration strategy or migration recommendations in terms of which tool I can use to take these virtual machines over into Azure. Back to you, Abhishek.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Let's which it is now. Hear me okay? Awesome. Great. Thank you so much, Bharat. So yeah, quick recap. Agentless discovery, TCO calculation, right size and suitability analysis, and support for a wide variety of Azure platform features, all of that for free in Azure Migrate. Bharat, I'm going to ask you two quick things, and hopefully you can quickly answer those for us. So we saw all of this in the context of VMware, but we are announcing Hyper-V this week. Yep. Would the process work the same for Hyper-V that it did for VMware?
Yeah, absolutely. The process is exactly the same. So you're going to start out by creating an Azure migration project. You're going to download an appliance. In this case, unlike in the VMware case, you had an OVA formatted appliance. In the Hyper-V case, you're going to get a bunch of VHDs that you can then import into your Hyper-V environment and stand up that appliance. Once that is done, the rest of the steps are exactly the same. You're going to log into your appliance, connect it to the project, discover your virtual machines running on Hyper-V, head back over to the Azure portal, start at the Azure migration project, and start creating dependencies. So the exact same flow. The only thing that changes is the way you're going to get that appliance deployed on-prem.
Great. And because all of you showed up so early at 9 in the morning to talk about Azure migration, if anyone wants access to that limited private preview for Hyper-V, you guys get access. So just let us know, subscription, work with us after the session, and we'll enroll you guys into that private preview. The other thing that I want to quickly comment, Bharat, in your readiness assessment, you had Windows Server 2008 32-bit marked as with a green checkbox. So I'm assuming that you can show us a demo of migrating that as well.
Yeah, sure hope so. I mean, that is the reason I actually chose to migrate over to Azure. So yeah, I hope I'll be able to show you that too.
OK, cool. So with that, let's start talking about the next tool for discovery and assessment. And the tool that we'll talk about is Cloudomize. While when it comes to assessment, I mentioned a few tools before as well. Turbonomic does some great work. TSO Logic, Current. They have all cool capabilities for discovery and assessment. In my conversation with customers may already be using a specific tool. So it's OK. Keep using that tool. So long as you plan your migrations to Azure in a timely manner and you get the right feature, it's OK. One piece of tech that I want to zoom into for Cloudomize is their ability to perform that agentless application dependency. So we have application dependency in Azure Migrate as well, but we too take a dependency on service map and its agents. When you're planning dependency analysis as a separate phase for a very large data center, it's likely that you want to do it a little faster and hopefully without agents. That's where Cloudamize and its tech can help you if you're planning it and if you really want to look at a dependency map very comprehensively. So the feature that we'll focus on is agentless application dependency. But before we do that, let me quickly tell you a few other features that Cloudamize has, and we will see a Cloudamize demo for that specific feature. So Cloudamize can also let you do in-depth performance analysis as you migrate to IaaS. So you can plan for compute, you can plan for storage, you can plan for network. They also have capabilities for firewall analysis and any kind of rules that you may need to worry about as you're migrating to the cloud. You also get comprehensive TCO-based calculation and right-sizing assessments when you use Cloudamize. Another area is this particular application dependency feature, which is agentless, very, very powerful. So we've been using it as well, and we'll show you how this works. More importantly, you can get interconnected and dependencies for a variety of applications, and you can plan your migration groups based on type of application, type of dependencies, so on and so forth. Another cool area is SQL Server Assessment, which is already built into Cloudamize. So if you want to migrate to SQL Azure, or apply Azure Hybrid Benefit for SQL, you can do so natively with Cloudamize. So very comprehensive set of features that help you do that. So before we go into Azure Site Recovery for migration, let's see how quickly Cloudamize can help us do agentless dependency analysis. So back to you, Bharat.
All right. So I've already logged into my Cloudamize portal console here, and I've already performed an assessment or a workload mapping for an environment that I'm looking to migrate. So as I log in, the first thing you're going to notice is the summary is telling me the number of compute nodes I have. So I have about 56 nodes that I've discovered that I'm looking to plan my migrations on. And I have these 56 nodes are using about 27 terabytes of storage on-prem. There's also a summary that tells me what is the network utilization put together of these 56 nodes. And based on the settings that I've chosen, Cloudamize has given me an assessment of what it's going to cost for me to run this infrastructure in Azure. So let me go and look at the details of this particular workload mapping and plan. So I'm going to hit View Details, and that's going to load up this view that is going to show me the same summary again, but it's also going to show me the virtual machines that comprise this assessment. I can also go look at more detailed recommendations on these virtual machines. So if I switch over to the compute, storage, and network tabs, I will notice that Cloudamize lists against each machine the operating system it's running, the recommended Azure Compute virtual instance, the kind of memory that it has, the performance statistics, what percentage of CPU it's consuming on average, and really all of the key metrics that are used to come up with this assessment. You see, again, similar for storage. So when you look at storage, you look at a breakup on a per disk basis for each virtual machine, the sizes of the disks, what is the recommended storage tier in Azure, and things like that. And again, with networking, you can look at the network utilization and everything else that goes into creating an assessment. So once I have all of this, I have already chosen my pricing plan and certain other characteristics on the basis of which an assessment has been computed. Now, one thing I can do if I want to try out a few other things and maybe look at the various capabilities that are on offer for me, what I can do is I can actually go into the designer, which is where I input the various settings that I use to compute this assessment, and play around with the settings that I've used a little bit, right? So I'm picking my migration design, which is really the settings that I've used for this assessment, and I'm going to say Edit. And what I can do as part of that is I can look at the various pricing plans that are available to me. So for instance, instead of using pay-as-you-go, if I choose to go with reserved instance-based pricing, I can choose if I want to get a 1-year reserved instance pricing or 3-year reserved instance pricing. The other thing that we spoke about is being able to leverage Azure Hybrid Benefit for my Windows Server platforms that I'm migrating. So if I want to factor in the cost of being able to use Azure Hybrid Benefit, I can select that from here. Abhishek also spoke about being able to assess for SQL and really take SQL servers into a managed SQL offering in Azure. And if I want to do that, I want to apply those settings, I can do that. If I want to carry my own SQL Server license, I can specify that. So a lot of things that I can sort of tweak and look at how that's going to impact the pricing of running this workload in Azure. The other thing that I can also do is if my organization has a policy that says that I cannot run a certain type or a certain size of or a certain family of Azure Compute instances, I can choose the sort of families that I want to allow in the recommendation, or if there's certain families that I want to disallow, I can exclude them and make sure that the recommendation that I get has factored that in already. Again, I can do something similar with storage. So if I want to be only on premium, I can specify that here. If I want to be only using managed disk, I can specify that here. And based on that, my migration design will come back and compute the appropriate pricing and let me know what it's going to cost to run that infrastructure on Azure. What we really wanted to focus, though, on this demo is the cool agentless dependency mapping feature, the dependency view feature that Cloudomize has, right? So to do that, what I'm going to do is head back to my assessment or my workload mapping and select this migration planner. Now, what Cloudomize has already done beforehand in this migration planner is it has detected the various processes that are running on my machine, and based on the asset classification that I performed, it's been able to group my virtual machines into various categories. So as you notice here in this view, I have a cluster of servers that are running my web apps, cluster of servers that are running my monitoring software, SolarWinds, I have my Citrix cluster, I have my databases, and each of them are grouped based on the kind of applications that they're running. What this view is helping me do is, as I plan and sequence and stage my migrations, I can look at the dependencies of which servers are relying on services from which other components and make sure that I'm moving the components in the right sequence so that I don't leave anything behind or don't move the ones that are dependent on a different component before the first ones. So let's take a look at, let's say, for example, I take a look at my web app, right? So I'm going to zoom into this web app by hitting this expand button here. All right. Load up now. All right. Okay, let me begin again. I'm going to this time look at my Apache servers or my web servers that I'm looking to migrate. So I hit the expand button, look at the servers that are comprised in that, or the servers that are running the Apache software, and then I want to see what dependencies this particular component has. So I'm going to head over here and select all the applications that the server is talking to, and you'll notice with the direction of the arrows that it can tell me which servers or which particular cluster of servers are dependent on this server for a particular service, or which other cluster of servers that this particular service is talking to. For example, you'll notice that the web server is talking to the SQL tier and that it has a dependency on the SQL tier. So I need to factor that in as I consider my migration strategy or my migration plan and in the manner in which I design the move groups. So to design my move groups, once I have the dependency view, I can plan my move groups by clicking the Move Interconnected button. And based on what I saw, I can reclassify my assets or reclassify my move groups and really decide the order in which I want to sequence the migration. So some really powerful capabilities here from an agentless application discovery and dependency mapping perspective. Really important and really useful for me to be able to design the sequence in which I migrate my application over and build my move groups. Back over to you, Abhishek.
Awesome. Thanks, Bharat. So the agentless application dependency is very powerful if you're planning for a pretty large data center and you have, over a period of time, lost track of what applications are running, who's depending on what, and you may run the risk of leaving behind important components or not moving the right groups. Now, notice the group capability or the notion of a group flows very seamlessly in all of the assessed products, and you'll start seeing them in the migration products too. So when you think of migration, you want to think of it in the context of a group. So you can represent a group as an app or a set of connected apps and then start moving them in batches of groups over a period of time, in many ways setting up like a migration factory for your entire data center. One another area that I specifically want to call out is Cloudomize already integrates with Azure Site Recovery and even Cloud Endure. So once you've planned that group, you can pretty much go to a tab and say migrate with Azure Site Recovery, and they will take all of that settings information and the recommendation that they've provided and move it into Azure Site Recovery in the background and start your migration activity. So let's quickly go back to our demoscape and start talking about the actual migration process. Now that we are done with discovery and assessment, let's talk about a few common migration scenarios. And the three that I want us to talk about is, one, how do you migrate Windows Server 2008 to Azure? How do you migrate any and every kind of Linux operating system to Azure? And how do you migrate out of AWS or GCP to Azure? And we will do so in the context of three tools. The first one is from my team, from Microsoft, Azure Site Recovery. So we will talk about migrating Windows Server 2008 32 and 64-bit to Azure with Azure Site Recovery. We will then talk about migrating any and every kind of Linux operating system to Azure with Zerto. And then we'll use Cloud Endure to migrate a VM out of GCP into the Azure Cloud Platform. So to get started, let's talk about Azure Site Recovery. And before we do that, let's quickly recap the 4 cool areas for Azure Site Recovery. So it's easy to onboard. Simply download the OVA-based appliance. Works just like Azure Migrate. Import it into your vCenter environment. Very easy to get started. You get a broad coverage for Windows and Linux operating systems when you use Azure Site Recovery. We also can let you migrate UEFI-based VMware or physical servers into Azure. We will automatically convert them to BIOS without disrupting the workload. And more importantly, Bharat keeps saying he's going to show us a demo of the 2K 32-bit migration, so I'm hoping he's going to come through this time. Bharat, take it away.
I'm going to give it a shot. Let me switch back to my demo screen. So again, with Azure Site Recovery, I want to start out by getting to the Azure portal. And the first thing I'm going to create with Azure Site Recovery is a recovery services vault. So I'm going to head over to the create new resource setting, pick Site Recovery, look for my recovery services vault, hit create, and specify a few settings, my resource group, region, etc. And that's going to create a recovery services vault. The recovery services vault, much like an Azure migration project, is just a holding area for a lot of the details that I use to act upon those migration. And that's where I'm going to be performing all the replication and migration operations from. So I already have a recovery services vault set up, and that I've called Contoso Migration. So I'm going to switch back to that view. And I've already set up my infrastructure by using the getting started experience. So I've come here already beforehand, downloaded the ASR appliance, and set that up in my on-premises environment, and configured that appliance to connect back up to this Contoso Migration vault. The appliance, of course, as you saw in the architecture diagram earlier, constitutes the important components, the configuration server, process server, etc., that I use to orchestrate my replication and migration over into Azure. So with that set up, I'm now actually ready to start replicating my servers. So to do that, I'm going to say plus replicate. I'm going to pick my source. So in this case, I'm migrating from VMware on-premises. So I pick on-premises. I specify the configuration server that I've set up. I'm migrating, of course, virtual machines, and pick a few other settings. The next thing I want to do is to specify the target settings on my landing zone. Essentially, where am I migrating these servers over into? Which Azure resource group do I want these servers to land in? Which Azure virtual network do I want these servers to be connected to? If there is subnet preference, and specify that. So I want to do all of that here. And then I'll go ahead and pick the virtual machines that I want to start replicating. So I say Contoso, a couple of servers available for me to be replicated. Select them. And the last thing I want to do is specify these properties that I'm going to use to push that mobility service or the lightweight guest agent that is used to replicate into these servers. So you have two options. You could either install that manually beforehand, or have Azure Site Recovery push them into those servers automatically for you. So I'm going to use that push install capability. Say OK, and that's it. I'm now set. So when I hit OK, it's going to start replicating these servers for me. Once the replication process starts, you can head over to the replicated items view here and monitor the status of the replication. Servers are going to go through an initial phase of the initial replication. And once that is complete, they reach a protected state, at which point I'm ready to start testing my migrations. So in order to test the migration, I'm just going to select the virtual machines that I want to migrate, right-click on it, and say test migration. Now, as Abhishek mentioned, a test migration is something that we highly recommend that you perform beforehand, because what it lets you do is it lets you test this migration in a non-disruptive way, while you can keep your on-premises application up and running and without disrupting replication. So all of that continues to happen in the background. Your application is still servicing your users. In the meantime, you can create a nice little sandbox for yourself in Azure, spin up test copies of those machines, log in and just make sure that the application is working fine, so that you know beforehand, before your migration window approaches, that things are going to work fine just the way you planned it, right? So to do that, I'm going to pick the isolated network or the sandbox network into which I want to perform the test migration, and then I hit OK, and that's going to spin up a copy of the virtual machines for me. So as easy as that. And I've actually gone ahead and beforehand already performed a test migration of one of these web servers that I'm running. So this is a Windows Server 2008 32-bit server that's running a Windows Server 2008 32-bit operating system. And as you notice here, it says clean up test failover. That's because I've already performed a test on it. I have a test copy of this machine running in Azure. And once I'm satisfied with the performance, or I've tweaked and made sure I pick the necessary settings, I can then clean them up and go back ahead and wait for my migration window to approach. So that was Azure Site Recovery operation for you. Very easy to move servers. Yep, back over to you, Abhishek.
Awesome. Great. So, all right, some applause. Great. Thank you. We are awake. Great. Thank you. Yes, so very easy to migrate your on-premises app to Azure. Very simple to use, and again, free for use for migration, covers a variety of Windows and Linux operating systems. Bharat, though I think you may have tried to pull a fast one on us, your Contoso retail app, right? And he migrated 6. You left a few VM behind, and you didn't really follow the Azure Migrate recommendation to not leave a VM behind. What happened there?
Well, I'm glad you noticed. Since you noticed that, you would also notice that when I pulled up the Azure Migrate assessment, it had showed me the recommended tool in order to perform that migration. And you'll remember that in the case of the SQL servers, the assessment had actually recommended that I use the DMS tool to consider migrating the database over to a managed instance in Azure. That way, I don't have to deal with the hassle of having to manage both the database and the virtual machine, keeping the operating system patched, etc. All that is taken care of for you by Azure, and all you need to be concerned with is the database itself. Of course, if I wanted to, I could have also migrated the virtual machines over to Azure IaaS or Azure Compute and run the SQL Server on that virtual machine instance. But in this particular case, I just chose to stay true to the recommendations that Azure Migrate made and moved my data tier over using the database migration service. What I've done with Azure Site Recovery is I've moved the other tiers of my application, which is my app tier and my web tier. And with the database running on managed SQL instance, I'll be able to connect them up and get the application working in Azure again.
Okay, great. So we didn't leave a VM behind, so that makes me feel much better. So great, databases moved with database migration service. Other VMs moved with Azure Site Recovery. The Azure Migrate recommendation was followed exactly how it was, and the application moves to Azure. Now, we're not showing you a DMS demo in this session, but Friday morning, if you're still awake after all the partying, 9 o'clock in the morning, I believe there is a session. We'll have a session code up on the slide at the end where you can go see database migration service in action, or just come to the booth and find us, and we'll show you a demo of how to do that as well. The other thing, Bharat, that I'm going to ask you, you said you migrated a Windows Server 2008 32-bit VM, but unless I see it running, I don't believe you.
Oh, gosh, Abhishek, you're unrelenting, huh?
I am.
All right, so you notice here that I have this Contoso Web 1. That's the server that I've actually performed a test migration on. If I head over to the Azure Compute page or the Azure Virtual Machines page, you'll notice that I have the server that's running here, the Contoso Web 1. It's suffixed with test because this is a test copy that Azure Site Recovery has automatically created for me. And you notice that I've also assigned a public IP address to this particular virtual machine. That's 4087.90.109. So maybe what I can do is try an RDP to this machine and show you that I've indeed actually migrated it. So let me head back over and try and connect. In fact, I already have the connection open. So you'll notice that this machine is 4087.90.109. It does look like a Windows Server machine. And we'll try and connect up to that again. So it does say here Windows Server 2008 Data Center. But just to be certain, what we can also do is open up the system properties, and you'll notice here that this particular machine is running a 32-bit version of the operating system. So that's Windows Server 2008 Service Pack 2, 32-bit operating system running for you in Azure, migrated using Azure Site Recovery.
Fantastic. So point to be noted, Windows Server 2008 works in Azure, is supported in Azure. 3 years of additional security updates even past the end of support date in 2020. And you can use Azure Site Recovery to migrate it today for free. So if you haven't already started migrating your Windows Server 2008, you want to do that first thing Monday morning when you go back. So with that, let's start talking about some of the other tools that can help you perform migrations. And the first tool that I want to quickly talk about is Zerto. Now, Zerto is a cool piece of technology that lets you migrate any and every Windows or Linux virtual machine, VMware or Hyper-V, to Azure without using an agent. So we're going to show you a demo of Zerto as well. But before we do that, let me quickly tell you a few areas that Zerto provides a lot of advantage for your migration scenarios. So if you've used Zerto for DR and you are already familiar with Zerto, go ahead and start using it for migration as well. You get continuous replication for all of your virtual machines and applications. Just like Azure Site Recovery, you can also perform migration testing with Zerto. You can also fail over to any particular point in time. Zerto uses the concept of a journal, so you can actually go to a specific point in time when you perform migration. You can also choose to roll back. You also don't need any kind of additional hardware on premises to use Zerto for your migration activity. What I'm also going to do is show you a conceptual view of how Zerto works, just like I showed it to you for Azure Site Recovery. So if you are running VMware, and we can help you to get to Azure, start off by installing the Zerto components on premises. This is usually the Zerto Virtual Manager, which is a VM running in your on-premises environment. Internally, it automatically places the virtual replication appliance, a VRA, super light, does not need any kind of management. Those get placed on your vSphere host. So the host itself can start replicating your Windows or Linux virtual machines without needing an agent to do so. Once you've done that, from the Azure Marketplace, go ahead and grab the Zerto Cloud Appliance. The Zerto Cloud Appliance will help you manage the migration activity directly from the Azure experience itself. And then you can, using a VPN gateway, start replicating virtual machines and applications to Azure. And then once you're ready, use a no zero data loss or near zero data loss feature and import those virtual machines dynamically into Azure. All of the data stays in storage until you're ready to perform the migration to Azure. So what we will do is we'll also see Zerto in action. So Bharat, show us a demo of Zerto.
All right.
Great.
So what I've done is I already have this Zerto Virtual Manager appliance set up. So this is my primary site, which is in Boston, Massachusetts. I've also gone ahead and acquired the Zerto Cloud Appliance from the Azure Marketplace and set that up in my Azure site. And I can log into the Cloud Appliance. You'll notice here that this one is running in Azure. And when I come back to my Virtual Manager, you'll notice this nice little graphic is telling me that I have a few virtual machines or a few virtual protection groups already being replicated out to my other site in Azure. Let me head over to the sites view, and you'll notice that this particular appliance is already aware of the Azure site that I have. And I can now actually start replicating my servers over into Azure using Zerto. So to do that, I'm going to head over to the VPG or the Virtual Protection Group view and create a new Virtual Protection Group. Now, what a virtual protection group really is a collection of VMs that you can actually replicate and move over to one consistent point. In this particular case, I'm just going to pick a single VM. So I'm going to try and migrate an Ubuntu server that's running Ubuntu over to Azure to show you the OS agnostic capability that Zerto provides. So let me pick a name for my VPG. I'm going to call it Contoso Migration Linux, rather unimaginatively. Pick the virtual machines that I want to start replicating. So I have an Ubuntu Server 3 that's running on-prem. That's named Ubuntu Server 3. I'm going to pick that. Hit next. Of course, I'm migrating to Azure, so I pick my Azure site. A bunch of settings that I can provision relating to how I want to replicate them, the kind of storage settings I want to use. If I want to perform any further management beyond just migrating it, I can select those things. Just click through it. Next, 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 and be done with it. So I can hit done. And that's going to start replicating my virtual machines in the VPG over to my target site in Azure. Now, I already have a few virtual machines that I've specified for replication beforehand. So you'll notice that there are a bunch of virtual protection groups here that I already have replicating to my Azure site. And I have one virtual protection group from which I have an Ubuntu server that I've already migrated over into Azure. Now, if I want to start moving any of these VPGs, I can look at it. So I can click on one and look at how that particular virtual protection group is doing. So what this view is going to tell me is going to tell me how a replication for that particular virtual protection group is performing. Is it meeting my requirements in terms of SLA and lag and things like that? And once I'm satisfied with that, I can actually go ahead and start performing a migration. To perform a migration, I'm just going to head back over to the virtual protection group view, select actions, and say move VPG. Select the VPGs that I want to move. Hit next. If I want to force a shutdown or keep VMs, I can specify that just to make sure that I have zero data loss. Hit next, and really go ahead and start that move operation. So that was Zerto in action for you, really cool tech. Thanks to our friends here. OS agnostics, very easy. Doesn't really matter what I'm running on the server. And with a few steps, I was able to move that machine over into Azure.
Great, awesome, yeah. So if you are looking at a wide variety of Linux operating systems and you want to cover down to the last piece of distro that you want to move, if you have a long tail of distros that have sprawled in your organization, go ahead and look at Zerto, and they have a booth at the expo floor, and they can give you more information on how to go about getting a demo or getting started. But one piece of information, if we logged into the 2K8 VM to make sure it was working, we also need to make sure this one's working. So Can you make sure that the Ubuntu VM did migrate successfully to Azure?
Sure, we can take a look at that. So if you notice, this is the virtual production group that we had already migrated prior to this demo. And this group had contained one server that was named Ubuntu Server. As I head over to my Azure subscription, and if I look at the virtual machines view, you will notice that that Ubuntu server is indeed running in Azure, right? So I head back over to the server, look at the network settings for that server, and you'll notice that this server has an IP address of 10.02.6 on the virtual network that it's connected to. Now, if you recollect, I already have my VPN gateway set up that's connecting my on-premises network to my Azure subscription or my Azure virtual network. What that basically means is from my on-prem environment, which I'm logged into here, I should be able to connect up to this IP address and access whatever is there on that particular machine. Now, you asked if I could SSH, but I'm actually going to do one better. I'm actually going to log into that and show you an application that I'm running on that particular machine. So you know that I'm migrating not just the virtual machine, but also the application that's running on it. And this one is running an Apache web server. So you log in, you can look at the default Apache web server page. So you can be rest assured that I moved not just the virtual machine, but also all of the application and everything else in it.
Great, great, that's awesome. So one other thing to keep in consideration, when we moved the Windows VM, we were using public IP, so we just connected a public IP back to that VM. We were able to access it. In the case of the VM that we moved with Zerto, the connectivity was set up such that the application was going to be accessed using a private IP post-migration. You can use the Azure portal networking experience to go and assign IP addresses and start connecting back as you need to get your clients back onto those applications. Work similarly, both of these tools support those features. So let's look at the final tool that we're going to look at and how you can migrate if you are already in AWS and GCP, how you can get to Azure, help us consume more and more Azure, drive up our stock price, and maybe get Bharat and I a better bonus next year. So let's get you migrated to Azure from GCP. And the tool that we will use to do that is Cloud Endure. Now, before we look at that final demo and get to that one final surprise that I have from Microsoft, let's look at what Cloud Endure can let you do. It can let you migrate any kind of source to Azure, any kind of operating system, wide variety Windows and Linux, any kind of database, or any application. Conceptually, things work very similar. Cloud Endure is a OS-based replication technology, so replicates from within the VM using an agent. You can replicate anything virtual or physical from any source. You do minimal staging design, which is called blueprint in the Cloud Endure case. This is the landing zone that you may have seen at Zerto or ASR. Once you've performed the blueprinting, you can iterate using testing. Only when you're happy, you can move it over to Azure. Cloud Endure will also perform on-the-fly conversion of the machine as it moves to Azure. And while the agent is being placed on the source machine, you don't need to do any reboot. That's similar as Azure Site Recovery. So even though we are using agents, they're super light, don't really impact your production workload. So you shouldn't really have to worry about it. What that really gets you is reduced complexity, higher predictability, lowered risk as you're migrating to the cloud. More importantly, it shortens your migration window. And that's how you want to get to. You want to make your migration factory well-tuned so that you're predictable and migrating at a certain run rate every single week, every single month. Only then can you really modernize your data centers and move to the cloud. So the demo we'll show you, the final demo, we'll start off by assuming an assessment is performed. We'll get the Windows and Linux VMs running from GCP and AWS replicating into Azure. We will configure the blueprint or the landing zone. Once we are happy with it and we've iterated over it, we'll move everything over to the nice blue cloud, Azure, and hopefully things will be fine after that with the app. OK, take it away, Bharat.
All right. So what I've done here is I've already set up my Cloud Endure project to set up migrations to Azure. So the first thing you want to do is go ahead and log into the portal and create a project. I, of course, already have one created. Once that is done, you want to pick your source and targets. So I've already set that up here. You'll notice that I'm trying to migrate servers over into my Azure subscription, the West Central US region. And I also have a couple of machines that I've already started replication for. People make bad choices all the time. I made that too. So I have my virtual machines running on GCP and AWS. So I pick my Linux virtual machine that's running on AWS and my Windows server that's running on GCP. Use Cloud Endure to start replicating them over to my target landing zone in Azure. Beginning replication is really easy. All you need to do is say add machines. And that's going to guide you through the process of getting that agent onto that server and connecting those servers back up to the project so you can start replicating them. In my case, I already have these servers being replicated. The next thing you want to do is configure the blueprint for the migration on these servers, right? Which is really the landing zone and other settings that the various migration assessment tools have given us. So I head over to the blueprint page for a server. Based on the assessment that I've received from either Azure Migrate or Cloud-Amize, just like I was able to do with Azure Site Recovery and Zerto, here too in the blueprint, I'd be able to pick the virtual machines queue that I want to get to, the subnet that I want to connect these virtual machines to. If I want to configure network security groups, additionally, I can specify that. If I need a specific private IP, I can get that created. And I can then save this blueprint before I perform my test migrations. Once that is done, all that is left to do is to test the migration and then eventually cut over by performing one final sync. So to do that, I'm going to select my virtual machines, hit launch. Since I'm going to be testing migrations, I'll say test mode. Say all right. And that's going to start a job in the background that's going to, in a few minutes, spin up test copies of these virtual machines in Azure. I can head over to the job progress page and pick the job that I just triggered. And you will notice that as this process completes, the status information here will get updated. And in a few minutes, I should have my test copies available in Azure to test before I perform my actual migration. So really easy. What's really cool about Cloud Endure is that it really is platform agnostic. It doesn't matter what virtualization platform you're running on, and has support for a wide range of operating systems. So you just saw how easy it was for me to take virtual machines running on either GCP or AWS and then migrate them over into Azure.
Great, great. Yeah, that's definitely very helpful. So if you are looking at moving or modernizing your cloud strategy or have committed to one cloud and want to move out of it, great way to move to Azure with Cloud Endure. So we've covered migrating Windows, we've covered migrating Linux, we've also covered migrating from AWS or GCP into Azure. This time I'm going to trust you and I'm going to assume that the VM is running. I'm very sure it's running. So let's finally finish up the session. And these are just a few of the wide variety of partners that we have available for migration. So I strongly encourage you to check out the Azure Migration Center for details on partners, tools, and best practices, and even content and labs that can help you migrate to Azure. You'll also get visibility into the wide range of skilled migration partners that we have available to migrate to Azure. Now, with that, I am at the end of the planned content. But I figured I'm going to show you something that I'm actually not supposed to show you. And I don't see anybody from my marketing team in the room, so I'm OK. They'll see it on YouTube. By then, it will be too late. So what we are going to do is I'm going to show you how Azure Migrate is evolving and the future that you should start seeing light up very, very soon. Now, we performed a discovery and assessment with Azure Migrate, and then we used Azure Site Recovery to perform the actual migration. What we are now working on is, in many ways, integrating our migration experiences within Azure Migrate so that you can, using the same Azure Migrate appliance, start off by performing discovery and assessment, and then seamlessly flowing into the actual migration phase of the process. So here I have an upcoming version of Azure Migrate. This is starting to go into limited private preview for a few customers. Again, since so many of you showed up this morning, I'm happy to enroll. If you guys want to try it out, do come to us after the session or at the booth, and I'll take subscriptions and start whitelisting stuff. But ideally, what's happening here is I'm going to start off by looking at the future version of Azure Migrate, where you'll notice the experience is going to start looking very similar to the Create Virtual Machine experience that you may have started accessing in the Azure portal. Here I have an Azure Migrate project that is currently showing the migrate step of the phase. So we are past the discovery and assessment. It gives me the option of applying settings to my migration activity directly from an Azure Migrate assessment. It can then pull the group that I have already created for assessment. So I'm going to pick my Contoso group. It will also tell me the assessment that I have performed on the group. I can then start automatically picking the virtual machines that I have assessed as one move group, move into the actual landing configuration. So I can start applying the target subscription, the resource group that I want them to go to, the network that I want them to go to, connect it to a specific subnet, apply Azure Hybrid Benefit, take it through the entire process of configuring the compute, storage, and within one click, start replicating. So in many ways, Azure Migrate and Azure Site Recovery are coming together as Azure Migrate, one product, one appliance. What you can also envision very soon is the place where I picked the assessment to be from Azure Migrate, you should be able to pick it from Cloud-Amize as well. And similarly, when I say migrate it using Azure Migrate's native migration capability, actually migrate it with Zerto or Cloud Endure. In many ways, Azure Migrate will become the center stage of all migration activity within the Azure experience, and that's coming very soon. But private preview access, I'm happy to enroll. And with that, I am at the end of the session. Before we switch to any kind of questions, I do want to thank you guys for showing up this early in the morning. A few sessions that you may want to go to. The Friday session on DMS is likely to be very, very informative, so I encourage you to look into that session. This one was session code 3055. I'd appreciate feedback. We work very hard curating all of this content and coming to you, so I hope you're very satisfied. If you're not satisfied, find us later. Bharat will buy us drinks, and we'll get you very satisfied. Other than that, we just want you to migrate to Azure. If there's anything my team and I can do to help you migrate to Azure, please come find us. We'll give you our business cards. We'll give you our emails. We'll help you with whatever we can get to Azure today. Thank you. Thank you.